I never thought a single sentence could change everything I believed about loyalty, about friendship, about the lines we aren't supposed to cross. But that night, when she leaned close and whispered, "Sleep with me tonight. It'll be our secret," my world tilted in a way I wasn't ready for. I froze. My friend's mom, someone I had known for years, looked at me with eyes that carried more than words. It wasn't playful. It wasn't careless. It was heavy, like she knew exactly how dangerous it was, but still chose to say it. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for betrayal. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding louder than her whisper. Every thought screamed at me that this was wrong, that I should walk away, that no secret could stay buried forever. But there was something else, an ache in her voice, a loneliness she didn't bother to hide. And the truth is, I didn't know if I was strong enough to refuse her. I had always looked at her as untouchable, someone I could admire from a safe distance without ever daring to step closer. But that night stripped away the distance. The air between us was charged, and every second of silence after her words pressed heavier against my chest. I told myself to remember who she was, my best friend's mother, the woman who welcomed me into their home, who trusted me, who should never see me as anything more than just a kid lingering in her kitchen. But she didn't look at me like that anymore. And for the first time, I couldn't look at her like that either. I wanted to believe she was joking, that maybe I misheard, that maybe I was reading too much into the pause, the tone, the way her lips didn't quite smile after she said it. But the truth is, I didn't mishar. I didn't imagine it. She meant every word. And now I had to decide. Do I pretend nothing happened and carry the weight of that secret forever? Or do I give in to the moment that should never have existed? Because once a line like that is crossed, there's no going back. I remember the first time I stepped into their house. I was barely 15, nervous, carrying a backpack that felt heavier than it should. My best friend had insisted I come over, promising me his mom made the best pasta I'd ever taste. And he was right. She greeted me at the door with a warmth that didn't feel forced, the kind of welcome that made a stranger feel like he belonged. From that day forward, their house became my second home. She was different from other parents. She laughed easily, but her eyes carried something deeper, like a storm, always hiding behind the calm. At the time, I didn't understand it. To me, she was just the mom who asked if I wanted extra food, who stayed up late watching movies in the living room while pretending not to listen to our teenage nonsense echoing from upstairs. But over the years, I started to notice little things. The way she lingered by the kitchen counter, quietly staring out the window long after the dishes were done. The way her smile sometimes cracked at the edges when no one was looking. The house was always filled with noise when her son and I were around, but when we weren't, it felt like silence followed her everywhere. I never thought much of it until I got older, until I started to see her not just as someone's mom, but as a woman who seemed weighed down by something invisible. I'd catch her glancing at her phone, scrolling through messages she'd never replied to, sighing quietly when she thought no one could hear. By the time I was in college, the bond between me and my best friend had shifted. We weren't kids anymore. We both had our own lives, our own distractions, but I still came by often, and every time she welcomed me with that same warm smile. Except now I could see the cracks more clearly. There were evenings when my friend wasn't home, but she'd still invite me in, stay for dinner, she'd say, and I would. I'd sit across from her at the kitchen table, listening to the sound of her fork against the plate, noticing how she avoided talking about herself. She always kept the focus on me, asking about school, about life, about things that didn't matter just to avoid speaking about her own emptiness. And yet sometimes in the pauses between words, in the silence between bites, I felt something else, something unspoken, a tension I didn't know how to name at the time. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just lonely, that maybe I was imagining the way her eyes lingered a little too long, or the way her hand brushed mine when she poured me another glass of water. It was harmless, I thought, but deep down I knew it wasn't. There's a difference between comfort and closeness. Comfort can be shared with anyone, but closeness, the kind that lingers, the kind that makes silence feel louder than words, that was dangerous, and yet I never pulled away. Maybe I was too naive. Maybe I liked the attention, even if I didn't want to admit it. Or maybe I just didn't understand how heavy things could get until the night she whispered those words. The night she made it impossible to pretend I didn't know what was happening between us. Looking back now, I realized the ground had been shifting for years. Every dinner, every laugh, every late-night conversation, it was all leading to something I never should have let happen. But at the time, all I felt was that strange pull, the unspoken connection that blurred the lines I should have protected. And when she finally leaned close, when her voice dropped to that soft, trembling whisper, it wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point of something that had been building in silence for far too long. I can still hear the exact way she said it, as if the words weren't meant to exist outside that moment. "Sleep with me tonight. It'll be our secret." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence in that room carried it further than shouting ever could. And once it landed, it didn't leave. It dug itself deep inside me where my thoughts couldn't push it away. I should have laughed it off, pretended it was a joke. I should have stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out before her words could sink in any deeper. But I didn't. I stayed frozen, staring at her, trying to understand why she said it. Why now? Why me? She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look reckless. She looked tired. Tired in a way that made my chest ache. There was a tremble in her eyes, not from fear of being caught, but from fear of being refused. I knew it was wrong. Every thought in my head screamed that I was standing on the edge of something that could destroy more than one life. She was my best friend's mother. She was the woman who cooked meals, who asked if I needed money for the bus, who made sure I had a blanket when I stayed over. She wasn't supposed to be asking me this. And yet there was no mistaking the truth in her tone. This wasn't a test. This wasn't a passing thought. It was a need-draw, unhidden, desperate. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. What could I say? If I told her no, I'd break something fragile in her that I wasn't sure she could put back together. If I said yes, I'd be betraying not only my friend, but the version of myself I thought I was. She stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough for me to feel her presence pressing against me. Her perfume was faint, something familiar I'd smelled 100 times before. But tonight it carried a different weight. I couldn't stop myself from noticing how close we were, how easy it would be to reach out, to cross that line. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she whispered again, softer this time. Her eyes lowered as if even she was afraid of what the request meant. That was when I realized this wasn't about temptation. This wasn't about desire in the way I had always imagined forbidden moments might be. This was about loneliness, the kind that eats at a person until they're willing to risk everything just to feel seen. My chest tightened. I thought of my friend, the years we spent laughing, fighting, growing up together. Would he ever forgive me if he knew what his mom had just asked? Would he even believe me if I told him? The silence between us stretched heavy, unrelenting. I wanted to break it, to fill it with anything that would undo the moment, but nothing came. Instead, I just stood there, torn between guilt and something I didn't want to name. And then she looked at me, not with expectation, not with seduction, but with the kind of vulnerability I'd never seen from her before. It was like she was silently confessing everything she'd kept buried for years. The loneliness of her marriage that had turned into a shell. The nights she sat awake waiting for a phone call that never came. The ache of being needed by everyone but wanted by no one. In that look, I saw all of it, and it broke me. I told myself I wasn't going to answer, that if I just kept quiet, maybe the moment would pass. Maybe she'd pull away. Maybe we could both pretend it never happened. But my silence didn't erase it. If anything, it made her step closer. Her hand brushed against mine lightly, almost accidental. But it wasn't. The warmth of her skin lingered, and my body betrayed me by not moving away. Every nerve in me screamed for control, for reason, for loyalty. But every unspoken part of me, the part that wondered, the part that longed, the part that was curious, stayed locked in place. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to stop the trembling in my chest. But when her eyes lifted back to mine, shimmering with a kind of fragile hope, I felt something shift. Not in her, in me. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just her secret anymore. It was mine too. And secrets like this don't disappear. They don't fade. They take root quietly until they change everything. Word count 048. So far in this section tumni ka main 2,000 to 300 words likun for this section of heipa 1048 words ho hain kaya cheho g mana high section continue Carter Rahan until full word count complete ho j furahai barmi done. You said okay chat GPD said perfect main abiasi main conflict / suspense section co continue Karen until it reaches 2,000 to 3,000 words total of Hayak 1048 words ho main a glad chunklik dune or enp updated word count but anatakam verify kar sakoki nahi hua main conflict / suspense continued her words stayed in the air like smoke impossible to clear impossible to ignore I wanted to step back to create distance but my feet stayed planted. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was something else. Something I wasn't ready to admit. She exhaled slowly, as if waiting for me to release her from the weight of what she had just said. But I couldn't. I was as trapped as she was. Trapped between the memory of my friend's laughter echoing through the halls upstairs and the woman standing inches away, looking at me like I was the only person in the world who saw her. My throat tightened. "This isn't right," I whispered, though my voice barely carried. It wasn't firm. It wasn't final. It was weak, shaky, the kind of protest that already sounded defeated. Her lips curved into the smallest, saddest smile. "I know," she said, "but sometimes right and wrong don't matter when the silence gets too loud." That sentence, those words, hit me harder than I expected. Silence. I thought of all the times I'd seen her alone in that kitchen. All the nights when her son and I were out and she sat waiting, pretending she had something to do. Maybe I had noticed more than I realized. Maybe I had been blind to just how hollow her life had become. And still, I told myself that didn't make it okay. That didn't justify the risk, the betrayal, the shame that would come if anyone ever found out. But the more I tried to hold on to that reasoning, the weaker it felt. She stepped past me, moving toward the window, her back turned now. Her reflection stared at me from the glass, dim and fragile. "Do you ever feel like you give everything?" she asked quietly, "and in return you just disappear?" The question wasn't about me, but it cut into me anyway. I didn't answer, couldn't. My chest ached because I could hear the truth in her voice. She wasn't asking for lust. She wasn't asking for danger. She was asking not to disappear, not tonight. I wanted to leave. I wanted to say something sharp, something final. But instead, I walked toward her. I don't even know why. Maybe it was the pull of her loneliness. Maybe it was my own curiosity. Or maybe it was just the fact that some moments refuse to let you escape. She turned and for the first time, her hand didn't hesitate. She reached out and touched my arm, gentle but deliberate. I should have pulled away. Instead, I froze, my body betraying the voice in my head. The house was too quiet. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge seemed louder than it should have been. If anyone walked in, if my friend came home early, if the universe decided to expose us, everything would collapse. And yet I stayed. Her hand slid down, brushing against mine again. "You don't have to say yes," she whispered. "Just don't leave me alone tonight." That was the moment I realized she wasn't asking me for a secret to share. She was asking me for a burden to carry. And whether I wanted it or not, she was placing it in my hands. My head spun. Part of me wanted to run upstairs, grab my things, and vanish from that house forever. Another part wanted to close the gap between us to give in to the weight of the moment. But the truth is, I didn't do either. I just stood there torn in half, paralyzed by everything I felt. And that was when she leaned closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin. My heart hammered in my chest, not from desire, but from the terrifying realization that I was already in too deep. I thought the hardest part would be hearing her whisper those words, but I was wrong. The hardest part was everything that came after. The silence, the closeness, the weight of what we weren't saying. I didn't answer her, not directly. But my silence must have been enough because she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at me with eyes that held a quiet ache, as though she'd been waiting years for someone to simply not reject her. We stood there for what felt like forever. Every second stretched thin, fragile. I could feel the tremor in my hands, the tension in my chest. I wanted to move, to break free, to escape the moment before it consumed me. But instead, I stayed. She finally spoke, her voice softer than before. "You don't understand what it's like to live with someone who stopped seeing you a long time ago." Her words weren't bitter. They were hollow, like she'd repeated them to herself too many times. I didn't know how to respond. What could I possibly say that I understood? That I pied her, that none of this should be happening. Every answer felt wrong. So I said nothing. And maybe that silence was the problem. Because in silence, things grew louder. Her loneliness, my guilt, the unspoken connection neither of us dared to name. She moved to the couch, sitting down slowly, almost cautiously, as if waiting for me to follow. I shouldn't have, but I did. I sat beside her, leaving just enough space to pretend it was innocent, though we both knew it wasn't. The air between us felt charged, every inch of distance, screaming louder than if we touched. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers twisting against each other. She didn't look at me at first, just stared down at the floor as if searching for the strength to say more. When she finally lifted her eyes, there was no disguise left. No polite smile, no protective mask, just raw, unguarded vulnerability. "I know I shouldn't have said it," she murmured, "but I can't take it back now." Her honesty cut deeper than the words themselves. She wasn't trying to seduce me. She wasn't playing some dangerous game. She was simply confessing, bearing a truth she couldn't hold in any longer. And that truth had landed in my lap, whether I wanted it or not. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking when I finally spoke. "What if someone finds out?" Her expression faltered, then softened. "No one will. Not unless you tell." That answer should have scared me. It should have pushed me away. But instead, it tangled itself around me, drawing me deeper into the silence we shared. Because beneath her words was another confession she couldn't say out loud. "I need this more than I fear the consequences." We sat there for minutes that felt like hours. My mind raced, torn between loyalty to my friend and the pull of the woman beside me. Every memory of her, every dinner, every laugh, every subtle glance I once dismissed, came flooding back with a new meaning. Had this been building for years, or was it only now, in this fragile moment, that the line had finally broken? She reached for the glass of water on the table, her hand brushing against mine as she did. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't an accident either. My breath caught, and I pulled my hand back too quickly, as if burned. She noticed, and a faint sadness passed through her eyes. "I don't want to trap you," she said quietly. "You can walk away, pretend I never said it." The easy thing would have been to take that offer, to stand up, to leave, to let the moment dissolve into something unspoken. But I didn't, because deep down I knew pretending would never erase it. I would carry her words with me forever, no matter what I chose. So instead of leaving, I stayed. I leaned back into the couch, my chest heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. She mirrored me, sitting in silence, her body angled just slightly toward mine. The minutes slipped by, but neither of us moved. It wasn't about touching, not yet. It was about existing in that fragile space where both of us knew the truth, but refused to say it out loud. And in that silence, something shifted. The fear didn't go away. It grew. But alongside it came a strange calm, a quiet understanding that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The longer we sat there, the heavier the silence became. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be broken with small talk. It was the kind that pressed down on you, demanding that you feel everything you were trying not to admit. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, her hands clasped together. I could see the way her fingers trembled. "You probably think I'm pathetic," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to betray how much she meant it. I shook my head too quickly, too desperately. "No, I don't." But the truth was, I didn't know what I thought. I didn't see her as pathetic. I saw her as human, more human in that moment than I had ever allowed myself to. And maybe that was the problem. Because the more human she became, the harder it was to pretend I wasn't drawn to her. She turned her head toward me, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe judgment, maybe forgiveness. "I'm not asking for forever," she said softly. "I just don't want to feel invisible tonight." Those words nearly broke me. Invisible. I thought of how many times she had been in the background, unnoticed, unappreciated, living in the shadows of everyone else's lives. And now here she was asking me not to look away. My heart raced as I struggled to hold her gaze. I wanted to tell her she wasn't invisible, that she mattered, that she deserved more than secret whispers in the dark. But my voice failed me because deep down I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to give her what she truly needed. She shifted closer, slowly, cautiously, as though giving me time to stop her. But I didn't. Her shoulder brushed mine, and the contact was enough to send a shiver through me. My breath caught, and I knew she felt it too. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us carried more than words ever could. Carried loneliness, longing, guilt, and something dangerously close to desire. Minutes passed like that, her leaning just close enough for me to feel her warmth. Me too afraid to move away. Both of us locked in a moment that shouldn't exist. Finally, she whispered, "You can hate me if you want, just don't leave me." Her voice broke on the last word, and that was when I realized how fragile she really was. She wasn't strong, confident, untouchable like I had always thought. She was breaking in front of me, and I was the only one there to see it. I swallowed hard, my voice unsteady when I finally spoke. "I don't hate you." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if holding on to those 4 words like they were a lifeline. When she opened them again, there was a softness there I had never seen before. Not seduction, not temptation, just gratitude. The weight of that look nearly crushed me, because I knew without her saying it, that this moment was more dangerous than anything physical could ever be. Emotional closeness can ruin you in ways touch never will. And yet I stayed. The clock ticked past midnight and the world outside felt distant, unreal. Inside that room, it was just the 2 of us, suspended in a secret neither of us could take back. The night didn't end with fireworks. There was no grand moment, no reckless decision that could be traced back in shame. Instead, it ended with silence, the kind that haunts you more than anything spoken ever could. She leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't push her away, and I didn't pull her closer. I just sat there caught in the impossible weight of what we'd allowed to happen. Her breathing slowed, steady, and fragile, like someone who had finally let go of a burden too heavy to carry alone. For the first time, she looked peaceful. And yet, I had never felt more torn apart inside because I knew this wasn't the end. Not really. The words she whispered would follow me, echoing in my mind every time I saw her, every time I laughed with my friend, every time I stepped into that house again. "Sleep with me tonight. It'll be our secret." It didn't matter that I hadn't answered. Silence is an answer, too. And mine had bound me to a secret I never asked for, but now couldn't escape. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just looked at me with eyes that said everything she couldn't. Gratitude, sadness, a quiet plea for something I couldn't give. I walked out into the night, my chest heavy, my mind racing. I knew I had crossed a line, even without touching her, because some betrayals don't need actions. They live in thoughts, in silences, in moments you can never take back. And that's the truth I carry even now. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones you act on. They're the ones you almost do. So, I'll ask you, if you were in my place sitting there hearing those words whispered in the dark, would you have walked away or would you have stayed?